Hi guys, I'm Chris from AUDAC. Welcome to another webinar where we had in the past a lot of videos and webinars we did on AUDAC products, how to configure them and stuff like that. Now it's time to get one step further and we'll see how we can implement our system in a network environment. So as you know, we have a new partnership between AUDAC and NETGEAR. Who is a manufacturer of network solutions. And in the end, hopefully this makes the life of an installer easier without the need of being a real IT expert. So this webinar will take approximately 30 minutes. Questions can be asked in the chat box where I and my colleague Erik will try to answer them. You can duck the video screen on the side of your screen if it's in the way of the presentation. So I'm very excited to welcome Sergio Mandas, who's a sales manager, and Eric Lindeman, who's a system engineer with NETGEAR. So I'm happy to pass on the mic to Sergio. So Sergio, please take us on the NETGEAR journey and tell us what it's all about.
It's a fun journey indeed. So thanks, Chris. So let us first introduce each other a little bit. As Chris already mentioned, my name is Sergio. I'm a sales manager responsible at NETGEAR for the Benelux region. I'm responsible for the Pro AV market. As most of you probably know us as well, we make network products. However, we've kind of delved ourselves in the last 3 or 4 years within the transition from AV to IP, and that's where we play a role. And we have some new collaborations, and including with PVS. So thanks for joining this webinar. So Erik, maybe you can tell a little bit about yourself, who you are.
Yeah, my name is Erik. I'm the SE for the Netherlands and the Benelux, or for the Netherlands and Belgium and Luxembourg. And I'm here to answer all your questions. And if you have any need for some training, etc., you can contact me. No problem.
Yeah. So if I'm correct, Chris, basically people can put their questions into the chat box, and afterwards we will stay into the webinar to answer these questions as well. Chris, what do you think about that?
That is correct, Sergio. So if there are any questions that pop up during the webinar, feel free to ask them in the chat box where we try to give an answer right away. If it's not very clear at that point, we will note it and we'll get later on in contact with the customer to give a full response to his question. Afterwards, after the webinar, normally we keep the chat box open for more, let's say 5, max 10 minutes, if there are any questions that need to be answered after the webinar.
Yeah, so thank you. So so yeah, we'll dive into it straight away. Before we begin, might be a good idea to manage the expectations. As you probably saw as well, you've signed up for the level 1 session. I think all of you have received 2 options, level 1 and level 2. So the idea behind this session is, like Chris said, 30 minutes. It's a more or less of it basically take us to the journey of Pro AV and NETGEAR, what kind of solution we have, the why, the how, and the what, basically. If you want to know more, want to have more information in more depth, obviously you can follow that through with level 2 training. I don't know, Chris, is it still possible for people to sign up for the level 2 session as well?
I need to check because I do not have a clear overview, but I'm sure Steve, who is in the chat box also for marketing, will or can answer that question.
Yeah, so I always put this disclaimer within this first session because sometimes people have lots of technical questions, or we try to keep this a little bit more all round. So it's there's something in there for everyone. So let's just start away straight away. So let me screen share, and you guys confirm if you can see this all. Is this viewable by everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So let's dive in it straight away. So PVS and NETGEAR. So we set this this collaboration up together because of the fact that audio on itself is obviously the A in the AV is obviously a very important important part of the conversation as well. Now we have a collaboration with AUDAC, and we will talk about that in a little bit. But before we move on to all kinds of solutions and what we have and kind of products, it might be better to just first ask the question, why are we doing this? Because I think a lot of you are familiar with the concept of a switch, a product which has a lot of ports and you can put some network cables in there, and it has lots of uses. However, what does this make it Pro AV? As you see, Netgear Pro AV line. So what does this make it a Pro AV dedicated product? So we'll go over the why first. Basically, how we view the market is what you see is there are two different planets in the same galaxy. And those two different planets, you can turn them around, by the way, because some people think that AV is more or less the colorful planet, and the IT is more or less of the barren planet. But the whole idea is that everyone wants to go to Mars. We basically have two planets, and in those two different worlds, there are certain concepts that might or might not be as familiar, but both of them kind of use it in a different kind of context. And I'll try to explain what I mean. So the first one is in the IT planet. You see all kinds of different concepts like multicast, data center use, CLI, routing, redundancy, layer 3, VLANs, all kinds of specifications that you're well aware of, probably. However, the question is, how do you apply that? Now, if you look at the IT market, it's much more related to what I see, everything that you don't see in a network. Basically, what's behind the network, basically everything that you're using, but it's not something you see with your eyes and ears. Now, this is where AV market, obviously, it's in the name already, audio visual. It is a different story because all these different multicast, layer 3, CLI, all these things, they still use the same kind of concepts within the AV world. However, they are translated to very specific use cases like a Dante codec or a NAV Pro or ES 67 NDI applications and so forth. All these things on itself is very important to use, and how you do that is basically what you see the right side. It's with all these kind of concepts. Now, what we see is that there's a disconnect between these two worlds, and you probably noticed this disconnect yourself as well. Is right now it's those two planets and those two different worlds of thought are too far away from each other. That means that you see from the vendor that you guys are working with, whether it's video vendors or audio vendors, there is a limited amount of translation going on towards the IT necessities that you need in network. Where from the IT part, if you ask a question, including us 3 or 4 years ago, we wouldn't be able to answer you to help you with your specific design. Now, if this is familiar to you, well, this is a problem that everyone has, because the AV market is much more related to the front end, basically what you see and what you hear, rather than the back end for those things you can't hear and can't see. Now, these two worlds are so far apart, and what we try to do as Netgear, we try to close that bridge. We basically recognize that there is a gap, because there is a gap and there will remain a gap. What we try to do is we try to put those worlds over each other. So there can be a translation, and it can be an ease of use to work with all these different, very complex, sometimes complex concepts, but make it as easy as possible to have that being used for all kinds of AV applications. Now, what is it all about? Basically, to summarize, we recognize a need in the AV industry. And the question is the necessity for a solution that can offer a stable bandwidth, latency, and quality. This triangle is well familiar, I think, lots of people right now. However, the reality is, how do you do that? If you up the bandwidth, there's going to be the quality is going to suffer, or if you lower the bandwidth, the quality is going to suffer. If you want to increase the quality, the bandwidth can suffer, and if the bandwidth suffers, you can get some latency problems. Now, this basically asks for a solution. Now, the solution that Netgear offers is a different triangle. What we try to do is we try to do to answer this question with our Netgear AV line based on hardware, software, and support. Those three things, we are able to offer a robust solution that offers you bandwidth, latency, and quality, including a ease of use that is unprecedented in the AV industry. So we will go over that in a little bit later. So we would first like to basically zoom in on the hardware piece. And Eric, I will sometimes include you, obviously, to elaborate on a couple of things. And Chris, feel free to also add points in if that's necessary. So first off, hardware. If we look at the hardware itself, which in this AV line, we have this AV line, is the M4250 series. The first thing you probably recognized, even when we were invited to this webinar, is that these switches look differently. But the looks isn't just a very aesthetic design choice. It is a very practical design choice because we made these products for AV in mind. That means this design that we offer, it means that you have seamless integration with traditional equipment in rack. It means that you can put these products into a rack and have that completely camouflaged and very neatly tucked away. Practical side of this is actually, and we discussed this not so too long ago with Eric, with a customer, is as you see in the picture here, the cables are actually at the wrong side. That means that you already have a first layer of protection, security. Because sometimes when you have open environments, for example, rental or maybe even studios, you don't want to have those cables exposed, because if someone pulls them out or someone does something, you have huge problems in your hands. Same goes if you have a flight case. Maybe some of you guys are using flight cases in order to build environments. In that case, you can build these products very neatly into those boxes without compromising security if that's necessary. And there's loads of different other points to be mentioned here. Eric, do you have something to add on this?
No, not especially. Nothing especially.
Okay. So second one is the PoE flexibility. Now, PoE on itself, Power over Ethernet, for those who don't know, and we will not go over too much detail on that, but PoE is nothing more than offering power over the Ethernet cable, basically, right? So it's a very efficient way of distributing your power towards your products that you need, that are also need a network connection. Eric, can you put it on mute, by the way?
Myself on mute?
Yeah, please. Yeah, okay, so thanks. So the PoE flexibility, PoE itself is not so much a unique feature of Netgear. It's not so, we are not the only ones that are offering this. However, what we do offer is an unmatched flexibility. Now, how that looks is as follows. Right now, there are three different PoE types. And again, those PoE types are not only related to Netgear. However, what we do offer is a combination of these three different types. As you see here, 15, 30, and 60 watt per port. Most of you are probably familiar with type 1 and type 2. Basically enough to connect audio devices, or maybe NDI cameras, or encoders or decoders, room panels, all kinds of different products. But the last one is a little bit less familiar. And what we try to say with this is we have a robust series of products, which is the M4250 series, that offers all this PoE flexibility, so all these different standards that you will probably need, into the same series without having the necessity to jump to very high-end series and also pay a lot more for maybe a very simplistic use that you need. Now, concretely, what this means is we have all kinds of different use cases we are able to offer. Now, as you probably know as well, at Netgear, we come from an IT background, right? Myself as well. I'm in no means an IT professional, an AV professional. You are the guys that are doing that. However, what the first thing I noticed at Eric when we were developing this market is that the PoE use cases in my traditional IT market is actually quite confined to, for example, phone systems, right, on your desk, or maybe access points, and maybe some security cameras. That's basically about it. With AV, a whole new world opened for us, because there's loads of different use cases, and you already see a couple of examples here as well. And Chris, maybe you can fill this in for me as well. But if you would guess how many of your products right now are PoE enabled in your portfolio?
Well, obviously we have a AMP203, which is powered over Ethernet, so it's a mini Dante stereo amplifier. But future developments obviously will all include. We're having some products on the roadmap. Can't say much about that, but future developments, of course, will include a load of devices with PoE connection.
Yeah, so this is exactly what we mean as well. We see a lot of research and development going on, from decoders, encoders to amplifiers. Now, the fun thing to understand in the back of your mind is that when more advanced use cases are being applied, obviously the amount of power that you will be needing to power those devices will go up as well. This is where the type 3, type 4, 60 to 90 watts per port will actually come into play, which is a very important part, because this brings me to the following example. Currently, if you look in the market, and if you want to have a high PoE application, you will mandatory need to step towards a very high-end series of products. Why? Because traditionally, PoE is an IT application, which means if you need high PoE, that's usually very high-end environments, which means the budget is high as well, which is okay. So you can offer that in very high-end switches. Now, as we just discussed, that isn't really necessarily the case for AV application, especially for audio, because an environment can have a necessity to have high PoE demands, but maybe only needs a couple of ports on itself. How are you going to solve that? Now, right now, there aren't really any solutions, because basically you have two options. It's either very simplistic PoE, or it's very high-end PoE, but you will go to switches that will cost you thousands upon thousands of euros, which kind of defeats the purpose of why this is in the first place a very good efficient solution. Now, what we offer is the flexibility, and this is an example. We have, for example, one switch, which is an 8 ports, as an example, as you see here right now in this picture. But in that same series, we have a 125 watts, a 240 watts, and a 720 watts total PoE budget switch, which means you can choose based on your application use case what you need. You will basically always pay for what you need, because we give you the flexibility to always pick a match for to use in your application. So that's the first one was design. Second one is PoE flexibility. We'll move on to the last one, because as a bridge towards the PoE application, and as Chris just mentioned, well, there will be loads of products will come out with PoE in the future as well. This is a great development. However, there's a downside to that, because currently, especially when you need low amount of ports, what usually happens, you have two choices. You either take a switch, you choose a switch that will be cooled, that has to make use of fans in order to have the right temperature, or you use what we say fanless switches, which probably a lot of you use currently as well. Those are usually some more simple switches that do what they are chosen to do, which is fine for now. However, if you're going to up the quality, or at least up the speed of the switches together with the functionality like PoE, there has to be some kind of cooling going on at some point, right? So this is going to be a problem in the future, and we solve that problem as well. Is what we basically have is we have switches in this whole series, which are basically fully managed switches, really full-fledged, full feature set, sometimes with 10 gig, sometimes without 10 gig. And these products, all of them have a built-in feature which has sensors in it. And those sensors, you can use it in a way that the switch itself will actually function as a fanless switch. or in quiet mode, as you see here in the picture. That means that it will cool, but not as loud as, for example, in data center use. And the last one is a traditional way that you use a switch, which is it either turns on and it will basically take off like a drone, or it is completely off and it makes no sound. Now, as I mentioned before, this is going to be a problem because if you're not going to cool, but you are going to increase the feature set, that will become a problem at one point. Eric, do you have something to add on this sound sensors?
Yes, in the off mode, the switch will have no turning fans. But after the temperature rise above 27 degrees Celsius, the fans will start automatically cooling the device. That's something I have to add on this.
Yeah. So no worries by thinking about that switches will overload or something like that. It will override itself if the temperature has the necessity for it. But
Yeah.
basically what we'll offer you is a high-end functionality with a fanless-ish kind of sound production level, which is unique in the market. And I would like to say as well, this is another point why we have specialized on Pro AV, because usually this is really not a debatable issue. Why? Is because these switches, as you saw in the first picture on these two planets, usually switches, especially in this level, are put into a rack or maybe even a little small data center in a company. Well, the reality is, what we notice a lot with companies that are using it for audio and video environments is that these switches are actually in the forefront because they are sometimes built into nice structured cabinets, right? In, for example, meeting rooms. That means the sound production of these products will become much more important than traditionally in IT environments. So this is also something we got you covered, and this opens the doors to a lot of meeting rooms or maybe restaurants or all kinds of places where you don't really want to have too much noise production from a small rack or something like that. So we basically cover those 3 points for hardware. So again, design, the aesthetic of the switch, how it looks, the PoE flexibility, and what we just discussed, the lack of sound, basically, that we have the most quiet switches in this category. Now we move on to the more, in my opinion, more interesting category, which is the software. And the second one, software, is the first one that we offer here because there's also 3 points, is the M4250 series. These are out of the box, pre-configured. Now, what do we mean with that? It basically means, you see the picture here as well. If you have a standalone environment with some audio, with some speaker system from AUDAC, you basically are able to bring the switch to the location, pack it out of the box, click the ports in the different ports that you need, or click the network cables in the different ports that you need, and connect the rest to it, and it will be a hands-off configuration. Why? Is because our switches are from the box pre-configured with standard IGMP settings, with VLAN settings, and multicast settings. As I mentioned before, those are very terms. Those different concepts are probably familiar to you, but might be very complex to configure yourself. So we've done that already for you. Usually, when you buy switches, doesn't matter which brand, these functions are turned off by default. You need to first configure them yourself before you can use that. So it's a very simple tweak, but it's something we specifically done for our Pro AV integrators. This point on itself makes it so that almost 60-70% of the projects, rollouts that you have, can be almost hands-off configuration. Now, I must say, this is only, as you see in the second point here, this is ideal for standalone, single switch or audio deployments. If you're going to do more complex stuff, for example, using multiple switches in a ring, or you're going to combine a video with it, which is all fine, as you probably know as well, this will become more complex. And this brings me to my second point, because we got you covered on that point as well. The M4250 line has not only a pre-configured settings without even accessing the switch, but also has a dedicated AV user interface, including AV profiles. Now, what does that mean? Is what we've basically done is we've tried to make our switches as easily configurable as possible for integrators that have little to no experience, maybe with configuring networks. This means, as you see in this picture as well, we've done it based upon a certain preset profiles that are already put in the switch. So if you with the most recent firmware updates, I think right now, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, how many brands are in there right now? I think about per 150.
We are about on 120 verified manufacturers where we work with.
Yeah.
And there even are some lightning companies with it also at this moment since last month.
Yeah. So we've really, and we've highlighted a couple of brands. Obviously, AUDAC, which is the most important one, because we work with AUDAC very closely together. So this is much more. This is much more than just a distributor or just a distributor collaboration or just a vendor collaboration that we just pay each other a lot of marketing money, which you sometimes see happening. But this is really a software play. So what we basically done, as you see here in the picture, you can select a port, put a color on it, and configure that port based upon a certain profile. You select if it's is it Dante or if it's maybe another codec. And based on that, you click in the port. You can either color your own cables if that's necessary. And you always know how it is configured, because the switch itself will configure itself with the right settings, the correct settings. All those, as I mentioned before, IGMP, multicast settings, all those things will be automatically configured also when connecting multiple switches with each other. Now, there's a lot more to be said about this, but we will save that for the level 2 training as well. But I hope at least this gives you an idea that this is much more than just a piece of hardware that has a nice NETGEAR Pro AV stamp on it, because there's really a close collaboration. Eric, do you have something to add on this as well?
Yeah, the special thing about this is because we're working with the manufacturers, and at the stage where you have to mix different manufacturers with each other on one switch, we were able also to do the troubleshooting and that kind of things in our labs when it comes to problems and solve them in the new firmware or with the new quality of service settings and that kind of thing. So there is also a way for ad support when you use multiple manufacturers on one switch.
Yeah. Yeah. So thanks, Eric. So Chris, do you have something to add about AUDAC on itself? Maybe something I'm forgetting?
Okay, well, I think on the support channel, what we see is that a lot of our installers who are actually in some cases not real IT experts run into issues of how to configure the whole system in the network. And as you mentioned before, the AV profiles, it's a wonderful thing. I think it will make life really easy for the installer. And as far as I'm concerned, what I remember is no matter how small or big the project is, NETGEAR can also always offer a solution. So no, yeah, very
Well
nice.
said, Chris. So we'll move on to the point that I do want to emphasize here as well. Some of you that are in this session are probably thinking, yeah, but I'm not really waiting. I'm not really looking for a dedicated AV user interface. Maybe because you have an IT background, which is okay. But I would like to emphasize we have best of both worlds. In this whole series, we still have the normal user interface together with the CLI management interface. We still have that available. So for those that are looking at this and saying, I'm not looking for that, we still got you covered on that level. So it's only we add stuff in there rather than just taking stuff out. So we'll move over to the last point for the software. And this is a very important one, but this is also something we will talk about a lot more in the level 2 session. But this is already maybe a sneak peek, basically, for what we will discuss there as well. Now, we'll go into a little bit more technical things here. But as mentioned before, we have a pre-configured settings. We have preloaded profiles. However, what's centrally here is the IGMP settings. But what we have as NETGEAR, we have a specific version of IGMP. We call it IGMP Plus. That is right now, it's proprietary NETGEAR. It's something that we are using. And basically, there are two pictures next to each other. As you know, you have a source and you have at one point a port that the source has to go through, basically, the receiver. Now, what usually happens without IGMP+, if you look at the left picture, there's a very inefficient way of transferring traffic to one point A, to point B. Now, without going into too much detail, what this basically means, if you look at what we call here the spine switch, there's a lot of traffic going on there. Now, usually with things going on like multicast, like audio or video signals, this will become a nightmare on your network. This means the switches will lock down. There's going to be huge latencies. There's going to be problems with outages, all kinds of things. And some of you are probably well familiar with this problem. Now, the good news is this is a very familiar problem. And traditionally, to solve this, you need to have a lot of knowledge, even for the the experienced IT engineer. This is already something to study about, basically. So this is not an easy concept. So what we try to do is to eliminate the complexity of this problem, because this is something you will face because of the fact of the kind of use that you're using it for, which is audio and video related. Now, what we try to do is IGMP+. It is a much more efficient way of transferring traffic from A to point B. And it will only go over the most efficient route to come to its location. This means there's going to be much less what we say flooding, how we call that. And so it's much less busyness on the network itself, which means that you can guarantee a very high amount of uptime, but also guarantee the amount of latency and the amount of bandwidth that you will need for this kind of applications. Now, automatic multicast between multiple Netgear switches. This is basically a whole point. If you're using multiple switches, traditionally you need to configure IGMP on every single switch on the network, basically in a line, and one listens to the other. If you make one mistake in that, the whole network basically is not working as well anymore. Now, what we've done is with IGMP+, there is an automatic multicast going on without the need to configure that, especially in combination with those profiles that we just mentioned before. So you can link all kinds of switches. You can make a huge network without the complexity of configuring every single switch in detail. Now, this in the end means two things. First of all, is the simplicity that we just mentioned. So there's no need for complex layer 3 configuration or the knowledge for that. The second one is the affordability. Because normally when you're trying to do these kind of tricks, you also need pretty high-end switches in order to configure that. So there's actually two things that will offer this. So simplicity, but also affordability of these kind of switches. Eric, do you have something to add? So maybe a sneak peek also what you will be discussing in the level 2 sessions for those that are going to follow it?
Yeah, we're going to discuss this in depth. The big thing with IGP+ is that we are filtering. As a small explanation, we are filtering the traffic belonging to the leaf switch 1 to keep the traffic on leaf switch 1. If you're using normal IGMP settings, your spine switch always has to deal with that kind of traffic, and now it's filtered. So that's why we are able to scale out on a larger topology with simply IGMP.
Yeah.
And this is a sneak preview from what I'm.
So there's loads more to be said about it. So this is the third point that we wanted to emphasize. So again, we just mentioned pre-configured switches, the profiles, and obviously together with the IGMP+ settings that will offer you a guarantee for video and audio environments you're using. As long as you're using these switches, basically nothing can go wrong. You can build huge networks. You can make complex networks, and we give you a guarantee on these products that will work. Now that brings us also to the last point, which is support. And because we don't expect everyone to be a full IT or AV over IP specialist at this current moment in time, because right now for a lot of you it is still it's still something to be developed, and it's still something to be evolved in. So this is something that we find maybe even the most important together with software and hardware, which is our fundamental where we build our solution on. If we look at support, this consists out of after sales and pre-sales support. Now, after sales is that which happens after someone bought something, obviously. Well, first thing what we guarantee you is in this whole series, we offer you a hardware warranty, which is lifetime, a next business day replacement, and a lifetime technical support. In the first 90 days, so the first 3 months of your purchase, or I must say registration of the product, basically, that means at that point, you have a 3-month period that we will not only give you technical support, but we will give you 24/7 phone and email technical support. So we got you covered in this first period of time, even though you're not able to really make it work as properly, if that's the case. The second thing is the pre-sale support. And pre-sale support is that which happens obviously before the purchase. Now, what we notice is that this is basically right now lacking in the market. I mentioned those 2 planets all the way at the beginning, and there's a huge gap between those 2 planets. Sometimes that you talk about the different concepts, but at one point you will either see from the vendor, either from the IT side or from the AV side, that you will be left to your own devices. Now, we try to fill that gap. And how we do that is that we have a dedicated AV over IP team that consists out of 12 people. Those people are Dutch, French, English, Chinese people. We have all kinds of different languages, German, obviously. We have all different languages, and we are able to help you not only pick the products, but we're able to help you with the full design, as you see in these pictures. So we can give you a detailed design, what you need, why you need it, and how are you going to use it. Now, this together is also a commercial side of this, because we can also offer you advanced deal registration. This means there's some discounts possible, etc. I will keep that a little bit in the middle, because that's something you have to take up with PVS. Obviously, we do not do business directly. That will go through PVS, and you're able to contact our Pro AV design team when you need, for example, second opinion, because you might have already some knowledge on the level of AV over IP, or maybe this is completely new to you. In both cases, we're able to help you. So it's either, as you see these mail addresses, proavdesign@netgear.com. So that's the first one. That's an all-round one. We will take it up with PVS, or just contact PVS directly. So Eric, do you have something to add as well? Maybe you have an example of something that you recently come across?
Yeah, most of the time the questions are about mixing of multiple brands together, like AVB or Dente in combination with some manufacturers, or AV or video products together. And with people who have questions about the throughput between switches and that kind of things, and there's a special attention in the design. And so we're able to judge that and to give you the proper advices.
Yeah, so we're happy to help. So please contact PVS, or us can also, whatever you prefer.
Yeah.
And the last one, the third one here on support, is the on-demand training and certification. Now, what might be very good to mention here as well, because we have a lot of international people in this session as well, we're not able to visit each and every one, obviously. So what we have is we have a very robust training portal, including your certification. This is free of charge. You're able to sign up. You just need to register an account. And based on that, you can follow all kinds of AV over IP trainings. There's a fundamental training and there's a certification program. So you're able to get all the knowledge that you need, in the broad sense of the word, in order to implement products from Netgear. So concepts like PoE, concepts like multicast that we just discussed, all these concepts will come across as well. And obviously, more importantly, I find, because this is obviously a portal, not really interactive because it's all been pre-recorded, we will be working together much more closely with AUDAC as well. So we will continue to do webinars and also posting educational videos. Those webinars consist out of commercial webinars, more all-round, such as this one, but also more technical in depth. So right now we have a level 1 and a level 2 training, but we will go further on that, maybe on specific subjects based upon your needs. And at one point we're also we also have the will to go on location at AUDAC in order to give trainings on location as well. But we will go over that in the future as well. So if you look at the lineup, basically the lineup consists as following. I will go over very shortly because of time as well. You could divide all these kind of products that we have into 3 categories. Those categories are based on use cases: audio or standalone AV applications, AV application with multiple switches, or distribution to multiple switches. Now, usually what happens when people get introduced with Netgear, and I think that PVS, Chris can vouch for that as well, is there's a huge list of different products. So what will you choose, why, and when? Now, obviously, we will help you with the design, as mentioned before, but there is an easy way to recognize what kind of products we have. The first one is the 1 gig uplinks. That basically is a synonym for audio environments. So in most cases in your situation, I think all the types with just a P, as you see here in the, I don't know if you see my mouse, but if you see in these product numbering, you will see only a P behind it. The only thing you have to choose, how many ports do you need and how much PoE? That's it. As long as you know that, you're able to choose the switch that you need. And obviously, PVS is able to help you choose if that's necessary. The second one is the ones with the 10 gig uplinks. Now, those are very easily recognizable, as you probably noticed as well, because there's an X in there as well, the X of the Roman numeral 10, which is easy to remember. Now, what we say is that 10 gig uplinks are necessary, especially for video applications. When you're using multiple switches for audio, video, especially video, there's going to be more throughput. And if you have more throughput and more sources, you're not going to make it with just the 1 gig uplink, because then the whole network will just basically shut down. The last one is 10 gig distribution. And what I would like to emphasize here is that we got you covered. If you look at these 3 different layers, how we see it, is you can build a whole network from 10 gig to 1 gig with a 10 gig uplink to the core, as we mentioned it. Now, we will go over this these concepts as well in the level 2 training. So hold us up there, but at least you can now see what kind of products that we have in our portfolio. And this is also, all these products are also live at PVS. Now, if you just emphasize the big picture, if you just look at the big picture, what I just mentioned, let's say you're starting with a standalone environment, as you see here, and maybe put another standalone environment next to it, maybe in a different part in the building. But at one point, people want more. Maybe they will also want a video application. A video will work, maybe more simple. But at one point, you will need to expand that network. Now, what we offer is we offer a full solution from how we say core to edge to build a network and also to be able to expand upon a network. The story behind this is we got you covered for small situations, how as little as possible, as Chris mentioned before as well, all the way to very big environments with a lot of ports and with a lot of different applications. So video and audio is now working all together in this whole network without the complexity of what is usually necessary in order to make that work. Yeah. To end with a note, why Netgear as a summary. So we have software, hardware, and support, which we just covered, that triangle. The simplicity, affordability, and the reliability. The reliability is simply put because of the pre-sales, the after-sales, lifetime warranty, next business day replacement, and the fact it will help you with designs. So that's the support part, and it's the reliability of it. The hardware and the affordability of that is the fact that we always have something for each different individual use case. So you always pay for what you need, and that's especially applied on the PoE flexibility that we just discussed. And the performance is high end, but for an SMB budget. And the simplicity, I think the most strongest points here is there isn't another network brand right now in the market that makes it so easy to configure quite a complex subject like AV or audio on itself over IP. Right now, it's a lot of theoretical talk about how great AV over IP works together, and there's all kinds of theoretical things that are possible in the perfect world. But the reality is, almost everyone that we speak to, and that has some experience with AV over IP, well, there are as much challenges as there are a lot of expectations. So we basically solve that problem, not because we create a completely different product, but because we almost negate the whole complexity that comes with a subject as this. So this is the end of the session, and I'm going to close this one. Maybe there's some questions already.
Okay, guys. Also, a big thank you from my side, Sergio, Eric.
You're welcome.
Give us an insight on that Netgear story, and I'm sure it will help our customers to make the correct configuration, and also the support channel, our side of the support channel and your side of the support. I think it's a wonderful collaboration. So looking forward to that. Yeah.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
I think we covered most of it. If you have specific questions, ask them in the support chat box. We'll leave the chat box open for, let's say, 10 minutes. From my side, thank you for watching this webinar. Make sure you check out our website and the education platform for other videos. So big thank you for you guys from my side, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.